Next up, we've got Clare Devine, who is the Executive Director, Strategy, Design and Innovation at the Design Council. And Clare's presentation actually follows on really nicely in terms of healthy placemaking. So Clare, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, I'm delighted to be here today. And some of you may know us more day-to-day as the Commission for Architecture and Built Environment. But since 2011, we've been part of the Design Council. And our remit is to look across all aspects of design. So from design, from digital through to products, what we call processes and places to deliver better performances for people. And if I can explain that, we look at design in all its forms, as I said, from digital and product through to service design, which is increasingly, we are seeing, integrated with the built environment. And what does that mean for people? We are the government's advisor, and as speakers have already alluded to, we work across government, and these are the types of challenges we are addressing at the moment. Most of these really relate to health. We work across these departments, engaging with these kind of strategies and challenges. But as you can imagine, and it's already been noted by speakers, this doesn't sit in one particular department. It sits across, health and wellbeing sits across government. It's getting them to recognise it as the challenge. And I think the aspect for us is it's health, but it's wellbeing. Where we see people don't engage with activity, well-being plays a huge part in them not being active. And why do we need to be active? We engage with cities across the UK, but also internationally. Increasingly, if you put in healthy cities into Google, you will see how this is driving economic growth across the world. It is where business chooses to place their centres. It's where we're looking at impacts that affect not just the public purse, but also business as a whole. This is an issue that affects the public, private and third sector, and we certainly are working across those. Where did we start? We've worked in health and wellbeing for 20 to 30 years, but a major part was a moment in time around the Olympics, and as you can see, we reviewed every building, every public space, and the strategy for the Olympic Park. But probably the most important thing we did for the Olympics was set up an inclusion panel. And that inclusion panel looked at social, physical, and socioeconomic inclusion. And it's something we've taken beyond the Olympics to look at our work more generally. And why are we doing it? This is the type of headlines we see every day. We're in a position of a blame culture, one which sits there isn't enough money, there isn't enough performance, there's more challenge when we deal with health services, which we do every day. There is a challenge between the public need and the demand that they have, and the ability to deliver on it. And there are many people working incredibly hard to deal with these challenges, but it does need change. And we know there is lots of documentation, guidance, and information out there about how to create healthy places. But why isn't it happening? One of the areas we have looked at, and today it talks about the headline for the conference is Design, Develop and Deliver. As Design Council, we have been taking a slightly different approach, and this is a model we've been using for 20 years. It's used across the world. It's called the Double Diamond. And what it does is it looks at the world slightly differently. So if you can imagine, this is where design normally happens. You have a brief, the brief starts here, and you work in a converse and diverse way to look at how you develop a scheme. As a scheme goes through, you look at options, you look at a range of different ways you engage people, and you come up with a solution. But 9 times out of 10, we find that briefs don't include areas that would help make that a better scheme. And this is a process that's used by service designers across the world, but we're increasingly using it in the built environment. And what we do is, rather than the develop and deliver in design, what we do is look at this piece, which is, let's discover and define what that brief needs to be. Who do we bring into the room? Often, and I'll say I'm an architect with 25 years experience working in industry, so often we bring in the usual suspects. What we bring in is the unusual people who perhaps don't sit in the rooms when briefs are developed. And often, as you probably know yourself, very few people are involved in developing briefs for schemes. But we also use this to develop policy as well. What we do is we bring in a diverse range of people, and that includes engaging the public with different types of conversations about what makes a healthy place. We use healthy placemaking and talk to them about their health and well-being and what that day means for them. What's the day in a life? What's the journey you have? Everything we do is focused on people-centred and understanding even if people come from the same age group, they're generally very different. So how do we engage them to understand better what would make a brief that would really understand the challenges they have in their day-to-day life? And we do this by having workshops, engaging with people. We go through personas, which is something that's used very heavily in service design that looks at different age groups, different demographics, different sets of needs, to start to define a brief that would actually more readily meet the needs of populations and understand that they recognise in that brief their input. Lots of people will say that's a risk in doing that. Actually, what it means is that as you move through a scheme, you get much stronger community engagement, you get member engagement because they can see that this is developing with and for the community. And in our experience, isn't causing us to have schemes that are more expensive in their delivery. This is also something that we use across the world. We use it with the Local Government Association to look at public health challenges across the country. We've used it with more than 100 public authorities to address challenges. And the way we do it is to look at 4 dimensions in everything we do. Human-centred. The one in the top left is a scheme that we worked on around health for those who are severely affected by a major trauma in their life. Understanding how a patient feels when they're lying in a bed for hours at a time is very different when you actually see it from their perspective. We use visual tools because visual tools break down the barriers between people who are professional experts in, say, for example, house and healthing, or a member of the public. It puts everybody on an even footing if we use visual methods. To disrupt, you need to iterate and iterate and iterate. You'll see the iPod and the Dyson vacuum cleaner. Both of those went through 150 iterations. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute we're going to iterate every building. But what we do sometimes do is we need to take some chances, and we need to think that some failure is as important as success, because it's only then that we actually move on to new ways of thinking. And we collaborate. We bring people from very different backgrounds into the room. We also bring people from different sectors and industries into the room. Sometimes people will ask challenging questions, and that's what we want, to move our own thinking forward. And why do we do that? This is an example of certainly looking at age-friendly cities that I think sets it really well. You can see on one hand we're talking about physical built environment, but the other aspect that's absolutely key is the social environment, how people work together, how they interact, how do you foster inclusion within places, and what does that really mean? And whilst this says age-friendly city, it could be any city. This is why good placemaking is really important, but also its integration with public services is equally important. So what do we see as healthy placemaking? And why is it an issue? I'm sure you've seen these types of statistics. But what we have is now a challenge that can't be ignored. It is of such a significance that we really do need to be able to address it. And also, why is it important, and where are there areas that can really make a difference? We're looking at some of the most significant house building in this country since post-war. And this is an opportunity for us to really embed health and well-being into the everyday. So what do we mean when we talk about healthy placemaking? What we really look at is this is integrated to people's everyday life. So how can we make this part of people's everyday life so that that minimum of 30 minutes can more readily be achieved? Key headlines: physical activity, obviously. Access to healthy food. That is a challenge we often see with high streets, which are particularly in failing high streets. having a plethora of fast food, having very few choice in terms of healthy food options. We've talked about contact with nature, whether that's a pocket park or larger facilities. Positive social contact for us, and this comes back to the well-being part, is really important. When we speak to people about why they wouldn't be active, they feel it's not for them. They feel they're not part of that group. They don't feel included. And that's a huge barrier, as we see it, for people to be absolutely engaged. We provocatively have put no pollution, but certainly pollution doesn't help. And certainly it underpins the health and well-being of the nation as a whole. So over the years, we've reviewed over 5,000 schemes. And in very simple terms, these are the characteristics that we generally see in healthy places. Many of these you've already heard. But it is underpinning people feeling that it's safe and accessible, and it's inclusive. I feel I'm part of this. As I say, it's the biggest barrier we see in communities of people not feeling either safe or socially included in particular places. So how can we look at that? Mellier Street Community Garden is an inner city regeneration project that looked with communities on an existing estate about how they could be actively engaged in regenerating it. And that included a local homeless community. People don't necessarily see barriers from other groups. They actually do want to include them. City Park and Centenary Square, Bradford. Again, the point of people being active and engaged, but also feeling in the centre of a city. This is part of a place that I belong to. In Camden, looking at different ways of being active, very much engaging local young people in that process, but also making it a space that's regarded as positive, not somewhere that there would be issues of challenging behaviour. Embedding it obviously through transport strategies, whether walking or cycling. But why isn't it happening more? And we recognise that whilst these are all great intentions, we're not seeing it happening as consistently as we'd expect. And so what we did was conduct a survey to establish what were the underpinning challenges. We asked 600 individuals who were architects, planners, urban designers, commissioning clients, and we also conducted interviews and have subsequent to this piece conducted further interviews. And so why aren't people creating healthier places? Well, what those responses said, we do try to include walking and cycling, but it's not a matter of course. It's not consciously embedded into briefs. So we hope we include it, but it's not consistently applied. We do look at decreasing car use, but obviously there are challenges depending on the individual scheme, and particularly we have challenges from clients and developers around providing car use and car provision. 52% said we do think about outdoor space, but we think about that round much more to do with provision of outdoor space, so not streets, not the urban realm. And 34% said they would think about indoor space. Now, if you look at the stats of people are spending 80%, and we want them to be outside more, but they're spending in excess of 85% of their time indoor. Health and well-being in the interior space, and that includes your garden if you have it, has very low priority. So what stops them doing it? Insufficient funding was raised, but partly that came out of it's not included in briefs. So when we try to push for inclusion within it, if it's not in a brief, it's regarded as a lesser priority. Accessing data and evaluating impact was really interesting. When we conduct reviews, we use what we call a contextual tool, which brings together 500 data sets. And we use those 500 data sets to set what's the socioeconomic, health and well-being data for that area beyond the red line boundary of a scheme. Very often, commissioning clients and design teams, whilst local authorities hold that data, design teams and commissioning clients often aren't accessing or using that data or understanding the bigger benefits that that scheme could provide beyond the red line boundary? Who is that population? How are we trying to support them? And that data and evaluating that data is really important in providing an evidence base. Community engagement was seen as health and well-being isn't discussed in terms of community engagement, very low in terms of the priorities. And an understanding of healthy placemaking, what is it we have to do? I'm often asked, what is it we need to do? How can we support this? We need more guidance, we need more support, but also we need to ensure that it's included within briefs. So what are we looking at? There are systems, policies and processes in place, but not all are right, and not really understanding how it cuts across local government, it cuts across place. Guidance on highways, again, was particularly referenced by many practitioners, but also commissioning clients as being a challenge to satisfy satisfy highway requirements, but also placemaking. So where have we been working? Well, healthy placemaking is referenced in the MPPF, but we are drilling that should be more referenced more significantly, certainly in the planning policy guidance, that it's in placemaking across neighbourhood plans and local plans, but it's enacted. That's the challenge, it being enacted. That we're supporting practitioners in making healthy placemaking a commitment, but also that needs to be within the commissioning structures. So what does that require? It requires collaboration, it requires across the sector, but also across departments within local government. It needs more data. It needs best practice to be out there so that there are examples that people can readily see of how this is created. And there needs to be support in delivering this. So to end, where do we work? Well, we work to champion, commit to achieving accessible, inclusive environments. And I would say health and well-being, underpinning it is inclusion. Without inclusion, you will not have a healthy environment. We use relevant and diverse expertise to bring people together to really look at this and try and disrupt and create new thinking. We look at what tools and mechanisms and processes are being used to embed health and well-being as part of the process, not at the start. That the budget does identify it within it. Now that might be just in good placemaking, but the threads are there. And that you're making those principles part of your procurement process. If land deals are being developed, if design teams are being commissioned, then it needs to be in at the very start. And as has been said by other speakers, to monitor and appraise the outcomes. Certainly this isn't something you can do overnight. It's a long-term objective to review and appraise schemes as they move forward. But these are certainly places that we are engaging to try and embed health and wellbeing more readily into places. Thank you.